This is the UV-5R. This is the gateway drug for many ham radio users or GRMS users that want to use these as GRMS radios. This is the entry-level radio. This is the standard. Any radio that wants to be a radio has to be better than the UV-5R. So this isn't the best radio, but it is one of my favorites because what it does is it sets the standard. It has all the functions that I believe a modern radio should have. It has the modularity that I believe every modern radio should have. A lot of your legacy radios like Midlands don't have all the same features as the Baofeng. Now, granted, Midland is a US company, but the radios are still made in China. So Baofeng is, I don't believe, is a US company, but there's plenty of offshoots that just have contract radios made from Baofeng, like BTEC or Radioddity, that are in the same boat as Midland. They just haven't been around forever like Midland, but they're still just US companies having stuff made in China. It's not ideal. I would rather have something that's not made in China or owned by a Chinese company, but that is the reality we are in today. So this is everything on the market should be at least as good as a UV-5R in my book, because you can get this radio on average for $18. I personally got these on Cyber Monday, a 2-pack for $30, putting these radios at $15 each. Growing up, when the dollar was worth more than it is today, I remember $15 couldn't even get you an FRS radio. Even today, for whatever reason, FRS radios are actually pretty expensive, for one reason or another. But these Baofeng UV-5Rs, for $18, you get all the features that a radio should have this day and age. You get a K1 connector, originated by Kenwood, and I kind of wish it wasn't the way it is today because everything is backwards. You don't have to use a K1 connector. You can just plug straight cables in. There's nothing proprietary here. Unfortunately, the microphone is the 3.5 millimeter jack. I wish that was the speaker out, so then you could just plug any kind of speaker or headphones into this. But your speaker is a 2.5 TRS connection, and it's simple enough to just get an adapter for that. You have your standard volume knob that's been around forever, where the power and the volume is all in the same knob. Unfortunately, with most Baofengs, they're pretty loose, so like I always say, don't buy a volume knob tensioner. Just go get an O-ring kit from like Harbor Freight or something like that. You get hundreds of O-rings for less than $10 of different various sizes that you can put on all your radios instead of paying $6 for a volume tensioner. You get an interchangeable antenna. This is an SMA female antenna like most Baofengs. However, sometimes Baofeng will hand off a radio to Radioddity to ask them to fix it, and Radioddity will switch it to SMA male because Radioddity, for the most part, likes SMA male antennas. You get your call button that is programmable between a single touch. Actually, let me just change channels real quick. Oh, I have it on auto lock. These particular units are used in my lunchbox repeater. So the channels and frequencies might look strange to you. You got your call button, which, because these are my repeater radios, aren't programmed to anything. I forgot about that. Which you get single touch and long hold touch. Most of my radios, when I do a single touch, it will transmit a tone, mostly because I can, and also for testing the radios themselves. You have your push to talk button, which is particularly hard plastic when compared to every other button on the radio. It's kind of weird to me, but it does give you a different feel from everything else. So you know you're on your push to talk, even though like it just feels like the rest of the radio doesn't really help. And then you have your Moni button for monitor. I wish they just did MON, but they did MONI for monitor. You hold that down, and you can open up the squelch. This is particularly useful if you have privacy tones set on the channel you're on, and you want to make sure that nobody else is talking on that net with their own privacy tones. What you do is, like, this is my repeater, so if I wanted to set up my repeater on Lunchbox 2, which is the GRMS repeater 2 preset, I might suspect that other repeaters are in the area in use. I can sit here for a minute at lower volume, hold down the monitor button, and just listen. If anybody is transmitting even faintly, I can hear it, and then I could be like, well, I guess I won't set up on Lunchbox 2. I'll go to Lunchbox 4. So I've actually grown more and more fond of the open the squelch button or monitor button on here. You tap your monitor button, you get the Baofeng flashlight, which, unlike the Amazon Basics radio, it comes with a flash button, hence a flashlight. The UV-5R, you can switch. Of course, I have this on auto lock. Keeps locking. You can switch to VFO mode without having to turn the radio off. You can switch back and forth just as easy as that. And that is particularly useful if someone says, hey, go to this tone, or you just look up something on the internet like a local police scanner and you want to try it out real quick. It's nice to be able to just dial in whatever you want without messing up your channels. Also, like recently, I am going to add channels to a radio for the ISS, the International Space Station. However, before doing it, I wanted to test it, so I just went to VFO mode, and I could manually punch things in. When you go into the menu, let me unlock it. When you go into the menu, you can go up quite a few steps, do your offset. I don't know, I probably passed it. But you can change your transmit and receive offsets on the VFO mode, and it does not affect your channels, which is nice. Other Baofengs, you have to turn it off, hold the menu button, turn it on, or turn it off, hold the AB button, turn it on, and it'll switch between VFO mode. But the UV-5R, for whatever reason, is one of the few that come with the stay on mode VFO swap. You have your AB button, which again, with a lot of Baofengs, they did away with this button, and they moved it to the back button, or the exit button, to swap between them. The UV-5R has a dedicated button. And then you have band, which honestly, I think is entirely useless. It's for when you're in VFO mode, it swaps between VHF and UHF. I think it's useless because I'm going to be punching in the numbers anyway, and that it still automatically switches between bands. You have your full DTMF keypad, and what that means is you have a grid of 4x4, and each column and row plays a different tone, and when they overlap, they play two different tones, just like on an old phone, or what new phones kind of mimic. The whole point of that, in the old days, a little history lesson, is operators were physically switching cables, and that's not very cost effective. So they wanted to get rid of that. Bell pretty much pushed the development of the transistor for that particular purpose before the space race, to get rid of human operators. And the way the whole system worked, it was the DTMF pad, a 4x4 grid that plays different tones. Actually, let me see if I can show you. And then the purely analog computer on the switchboard could read those two intermixing tones to determine what number you're dialing. And in the modern day on radios, that is still important because some repeaters have fancy functions like recording messages if you type in the correct number combo while transmitting, or it could play back a test tone, or you could force it to do its sorry, I was looking at my screen and I got lost for words. You can force it to do its Morse code for its call sign, such and such. You have to look up for that particular particular repeater, how to control it, if they want that to be public information. But if you transmit, you have to be transmitting at the same time. And you can hear 2 different tones in a 4x4 grid being transmitted. This is a 5-watt radio. Despite what any Baofeng says, they're pretty much 5 watts. You really shouldn't be fretting over, oh, my Baofeng FP8 says it does 8 watts and it's only doing 7. Well, no, it's still 5 watts. Every other handheld is going to be 5 watts. And the way it works is you have to double your wattage for every 3 decibels of gain. So that difference between 5 and 10 is very minuscule. Yes, it would be nice to have a 10-watt radio, which is the upper limit of getting RF burns if you're resting against the antenna or whatever at 10 watts. But there's a reason why the quality companies only do 5 watts, because that's all you really need. What's more important, what I would say on the top tier, the most important is your antenna. Your antenna is the most important part of your radio. This little 5-watt radio can still receive from the International Space Station. It struggles, but it works. It can transmit, but again, you need a good antenna. You need like a 14-element dual-band Yagi antenna in order to transmit and receive properly to a satellite, but it is still possible with this radio at $18. Second most important is the internals, which is very subjective. There's no number to objectify how good the receiving and transmitting end of this radio is, but generally it's the receiving end which is far harder to do on radios. So the Baofengs are horrible. A lot of times when I'm sitting at my desk, this light will be green because my computer directly to my left and this monitor to the right are really noisy, and it'll cause what's called front end overload, and this will just stay in receive mode even if it's not making any noise on any channel. Even if I hold down the squelch and I can't hear anything, it's just front end overload from a frequency that's nowhere near what this is tuned into. So like your Oceans or Wotians have super heterodyne receivers, which doesn't mean they're the best thing in the world, because there are still varying degrees of super heterodyne, but they generally don't, they deal with front end overload. I forget which YouTuber it is. It's the British guy. He was next to a radio tower testing different radios for front end overload. Obviously the Baofeng struggled. Even like the Wotians and the Yaesus kind of struggled. And the only thing that really worked right next to the antenna, while connected to, I think, his vehicle's antenna, was a Kenwood. So Kenwood's still just super heterodyne, but it's got better front end sensitivity. However, I believe it was Ham Radio Crash Course. He tested a handful of radios as far as transmit power goes on the same antenna. And transmit's kind of the same thing, power is power. But most important is antenna. Second important is your front end quality, which isn't really quantifiable. And then the third most important is your power. Yes, power does ultimately matter at the end of the day, but it is third on your list of priorities when you're looking for a radio. Back to the UV-5R. It has a ton of menu options. Everything you can do on this radio, except for naming the channels, you can do through the menu. And there probably is a way to name the channels, because for whatever reason the DTMF board has... Oh, never mind. I thought it had the alphabet stuff here. Oh, my video just restarted. I'm gonna have to actually edit this one. This is going on way too long. This particular unit is the way that a lot of people like it. I personally love the UV-5R because of how tiny it is. So I like the stock batteries that are on it, because it is the size of my palm minus my fingers. It's tiny, and it's very quirky looking. It looks very industrial. It's got these big grips. It's got a screen that juts out. It's got this cyberpunk looking speaker grill. It's a cool looking radio, and that's why a lot of us do radios, not because it's practical, but because we think it's neat. This battery, because this is my repeater system, I needed a bigger battery. Most importantly, I wanted USB-C charging, and the small batteries were like the same price as these that have USB-C. But you can upgrade the batteries on these. There's plenty of aftermarket ones, and yeah, it's just the standard of radios, the Baofeng UV-5R.